All right. Hey, everybody. This is Dan Kroll here for episode 6 of the podcast, dealing with all things Britt, Kanawha, and West Hancock. The last episode I had talked to members of the 73 championship team, Jim Deemer, Rick Klein, Bob Sweers, and Coach Meyer. We had a great time talking about that championship season, so go back and go to my YouTube channel and watch any of those last episodes. Also had Kevin Sanger, Steve Everett Jr., Denny Brum, and Bob Steenledge as well. Today, though, I have the Timmermans, Mark Timmerman and his dad, Mr. Timmerman, Jim Timmerman, former teacher, coach, athletic director, and I call Mark an all-world wide receiver. He also lives here in Indianola where I live, so we've gotten to hang out and get to know each other a little bit over the last couple years. Before we get to the Timmermans, though, let's run down what's going on at West Hancock. Right now, the track teams and golf teams are still in their early season practices. The track teams have a home meet on April 5th, and then, oh, there goes the cat. I'm very informal here. And then they have a meet at Eagle Grove on the 6th, and the 9th they go to Clarion. That's boys and girls. Saw that Coach Welp has a pretty good sized roster. Coach Sanger's roster is a little small, but very talented this year. Boys and girls golf start at Groose on the 9th, and then they are at home on the 12th for an invitational. Haven't seen rosters yet. Usually they have, anywhere from 4 to 10 kids out each gender. That's pretty much all that's going on at West Hancock right now. A little football update. The new schedules will come out April 26th is what I just saw today, per the Athletic Association. All right, the Sanger Legacy Fund is one of the main reasons why I do this podcast. I like to keep that in people's minds. It was created to honor the late, great Coach Bob Sanger and his wife, Mrs. Sanger. They both taught and coached at West Hancock and Britt for over 50 years and spent a lot of years with the guy down at the bottom of the screen there, Mr. Timmerman. They impacted thousands of lives. It raises money to help the communities of Britt and Kanawha, and more specifically, West Hancock and the athletic and activities department. So go to Sanger Strong if you want to consider giving to the Legacy Fund. If you also want to sponsor this podcast, go ahead and give a donation at sangerstrong.com and let me know that you did, and I'll mention you next time. All right, let's get to it. Mark and Jim Timmerman, how you guys doing?
Great. I'm good.
Good. Thanks for coming on, guys. I appreciate it. So we're going to start with you, Mr. Timmerman, as you can see in the notes I sent you. Just start with you, and Mark, at any time, chime in, correct him, give him a hard time, whatever you want to do. So
I'll prod him on.
Yep. One thing that's really cool about Britt and a lot of the teachers we had was there was an Upper Iowa pipeline, and Mr. Timmerman, you were part of that pipeline, and you actually grew up in Fayette, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your upbringing, some of your athletic background back in the day?
Okay. Well, I moved to Fayette in 3rd grade. I was a farm boy, and then I'm the youngest of 5. My oldest brother and sister were actually out of high school by the time I got there, but I had a pair of twin brothers that were in the grade ahead of me. Okay. And they definitely put me through the ropes. If any of you younger brothers are out there, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. As far as growing up in Fayette, it was a small community, not really too much unlike Britt and or Kanawha. We had a noon whistle and a 6 p.m. whistle. And that was the time that whatever you were doing, you hightailed it for home, because that's when you ate at 12 and 6. And that was pretty neat growing up, because in between time you were on your bicycle and you went somewhere, you had a ball game, you name it, but you usually weren't sitting around at home. Yep. It was great. We had I only lived about 3 or 4 blocks from Upper Iowa University and their practice fields. So I probably spent about as much time when I was younger, before I got into high school, watching the practices and stuff like that, because I was avid about sports. The youngest that I can remember as far as a picture. You know, sometimes parents will get a 3-month or a 6-month picture. Well, in that, there was a ball. I grew up with a ball in my hand, whether it was football in the fall, basketball in the winter, baseball in the summer. So I always had a ball in my hand. And when I was in junior high, I watched a pretty slender speedster at Upper Iowa. They had good football, and his name was Denny Brum, and he was a very good end. And they had a couple different quarterbacks that were outstanding, and Denny was one of the primary receivers. And let me tell you, he could run. He was fast, he was quick, and he had good hands. Even though, as Denny said, he played guard in football team most of his career, and then he ended up, I think, his senior year being an end because he was fast. But growing up in a small town, it was great.
And you were the baseball coach at Britt. So I assume baseball meant a lot to you back in the day. How were you at Fayette?
Yeah, I played all, when you're a small community, one thing is you get to participate in a lot. I was a 3-year letterman in football, basketball, but in baseball, I was a 5-year letterman.
Nice.
Because I played in the 8th grade. You could play high school baseball. And so, baseball was the sport that I probably excelled the most at. And it was a case where, I had good control. I could throw strikes, and I heard a lot of coaches talk about throw strikes. You got 8 other guys behind you there to get them out. And I developed pretty good curveball, so hit it on the ground, let your infielders do the work.
Yep.
So that's what I tried to do.
Yep. And then you made your way to Upper Iowa, so you didn't travel too far.
No, a few blocks. The surprising thing about that is I almost didn't end up at Upper Iowa. I almost didn't end up going to college at all. In fact, when I graduated from high school, I still hadn't enrolled, even though the baseball coach had recruited me and had offered and given me an opportunity to be on the team. But I wasn't sure that that's what I was going to end up doing. Well, I want to give a shout out to the moms out there. My mother, when I came home the last day after high school, she said, "Well, are you signed up for college?" I said, "No." And she said, "Turn around and go up there and get that paper and application filled out." So to all you moms, make sure that you keep track of those kids and get them headed in the right direction.
Yep, definitely. One thing that, I read about, and I've known this too, talking to Mark, is you and Coach Sanger went to college together. And in the article that I read, you said he was on banging people around on Saturday afternoons. Sounded like he was kind of a stud back in the day. You guys knew each other pretty well, even though you didn't know you both signed contracts at the same school after college?
Well, actually, our relationship was even kind of started in high school. Although MFL, Monona, was not in our conference, like in track, they had the Bulldog relays, and our track team participated in that. And actually, I saw Bob as an athlete, probably his senior year, my junior year. He was a pole vaulter, a hurdler, a sprinter. He competed against my brother in the pole vault. Now we're talking about, this wasn't the pole vault that the poles where they bend and are flexible and then they spring you over. These were Swedish steel poles. And when you ran down the runway and planted that pole in the pole vault pit, it about tore your shoulders out. And I know that another Britt teacher, Ron Meyer,
Yep.
he was in Sumner, and he participated in the pole vault as well. And I know Ron, my brother, and Ron Meyer and Bob all competed in the pole vault, and they were going like 10 foot, 10'6", and
Jeez.
they were jumping into sawdust pits, not big foam pads.
Yeah.
But watching Bob hurdle was enough to frighten anybody, because it didn't matter. He'd kick it over and hurdles were flying everywhere. But as I said, I played football and was a linebacker. I cannot imagine having Bob in high school run through the line and you're expected to tackle him, because he was a horse.
Yeah.
I mean, tell you, and I would read in the paper where he would carry 30, 35 times every game, and he'd have tons of yardage, not unlike several of his sons. He was quite difficult to tackle.
I can't imagine, because watching him play ping pong when I was in high school was terrifying enough. He was a beast. He would destroy everybody. And I'm like, that's just table tennis. I can't imagine a young 20-some-year-old just ripping people up. So,
Well,
yeah.
like I said, he combined the speed and the power. When he got to Upper Iowa, first 2 years, we had really good football there. And he played defense most of the time, defensive end. But his junior year, he was over 1,000-yard rusher. And I mean, there were times when he would end up going into a pile where there'd be 3 or 4 tacklers and stuff. And all of a sudden, the pile just moves and it's moving backwards. And it is really unfortunate that he injured his back his senior year, and he didn't get to participate. He ended up having to get a back operation. But boy, I tell you, he had speed and he had power, and one person didn't tackle him alone.
Say that attitude he had just would will himself to, Yep.
You
And
bet.
then Mark was telling me too, you were related to Coach Steve Everett, somewhat distantly, but then you worked with Steve at Britt as well. And I've said this in some of the other podcast episodes, like everybody just thinks it's Bob Sanger from Britt, and Steve Everett was a legend of himself before Coach Sanger was even at Britt. And so anytime we can talk Coach Everett, I take that opportunity. So can you tell us a little bit about Coach Everett?
My mother, her maiden name was Everett.
Okay.
Steve and my mother were first cousins. So I'm the shirt tail second cousin to Steve. And Steve and Vi used to stop in Fayette because he grew up not too far from Fayette. And he was an avid fisherman, and they had great fishing in little streams around Fayette. And they would stop every now and then because he had other family in that area. And but he would stop, he and Vi, and they would visit. And this was before I was ever involved in Britt. But then I kind of found out that through my mom that Steve was quite a football coach. And then after we got there in Britt, and hearing that he had won like 5 or 6 championships in a year, and he was voted the coach of the year, football coach of the year by the Des Moines Register. Yeah, he was quite a guy. And when my first year there in 1968, I think Steve was there for another at least 4 more years. And Steve, he was very good to me. He kind of took me under his wing and just was very caring. He was very understanding of Bob in our first few years, and Steve knew how tough it was to win, and especially if you didn't have the horses, and when you got 140, 150 pound linemen, and the North Iowa Conference is not necessarily real kind to first year or young coaches, because a lot of them had developed, they'd been there for a number of years, and they had their programs very well developed, and had their pipelines from the junior high coming up, and so it was tough. But Steve was very understanding, very supportive of Bob, and I can't say enough good things about Steve ever.
Yep. Yep. And I'm excited. I did the Sanger record book 68 to 2019, but now I'm going backwards. So I have a lot of the information from the Everett era. I'm on 1959 right now. I'm excited. I'm thinking 2-3 years from now, I'm going to put out the complete Britt, West Hancock, Kanawha book. But it's been fascinating reading a lot of those news articles from the 50s and 60s with Coach Everett. So I just think that's
Sure.
pretty neat to include him in that history, because he was a big part of Britt back in the day that
Absolutely.
didn't know about. So,
Absolutely.
yep. So you got hired at Britt, same as Coach Sanger. I know the story's been told that you guys didn't really even know you were going to be both at Britt at the same time. But then I found an article online. It must have been when you retired. This is from the Globe Gazette. I just wanted to read to you, and it's in the notes that
Okay.
Mark sent you, but I wanted people to hear this as well. It said, when Timmerman arrived in Britt after pitching his senior season at Upper Iowa University with what he said was a fairly good curve and a not overpowering fastball, he found a baseball field that was sparse, to say the least. There were lights, but he said that they were more of a detriment than a help to any night game because of the direction of the beams. They might have blinded someone, Timmerman laughed. He also had to figure out where the infield grass stopped and the outfield grass started. There was a backstop, but no fences or dugouts, and the new head coach was also the assistant coach, the groundskeeper, the bus driver, etc. He wore many hats. And with the administration at the time, Timmerman knew it would be a challenge to turn his vision for the program into a reality. There wasn't any pressure, he said, just self-inflicted pressure to do well. So you got to Britt.
It
How
was
was
it was kind of a shock. I was happy. I was pleased because I was going to be able to teach in the science classes that I enjoyed, and I was coaching a variety of different sports, and I loved that. Now the baseball field was in need of a little work,
Yep.
and the lights, they weren't real good. In fact, it wasn't too long. We started playing the varsity game first because it was kind of a detriment to outfielders trying to find a ball that was hit above the lights, because the poles weren't that large to begin with, and they pointed in all different directions. So it wasn't easy for them, and it took a lot of work. And I wasn't the only one that actually helped out getting that baseball diamond to where I wanted it to be. Bob Grangenet, Denny Brum, Dave Beach, several of the faculty helped out a lot and were responsible for much of the work of getting new dugouts. Charlie Swears was instrumental in, he was a custodian there, and he was instrumental in helping get the lights, Musco Lighting, and all the baseball players. I have to give them props because they did a lot of legwork. And I have to also give your dad a lot of work. He ran the pizza store there, and he gave us one of those opportunities to whereby you could buy 5 pizzas, and he threw the other one in. He gave us a discount, and we raised a lot of money that went towards fencing and stuff. I know one Saturday, I think it was either Jay Burgart or his dad, they brought in a post hole digger, and we set the metal posts and put bags of sackreed in them, got the poles all set. and stretched wire the next weekend. So there was just a lot of people involved in, and the community was so great also because they helped support. Kids would go out and sell the pizza coupons and stuff, and we just had a lot of great people helping out. But to say the least, the baseball field looks a little different now than when it did my first year there.
I want to remind you, Dad, you made the baseball team go out and detassel.
I didn't want to bring that up.
and give all the money to the baseball program. So I remember doing that.
Free child labor. I love it.
That's right.
You mentioned my dad. There's a story I want to ask you if you remember. So my dad played at Buffalo Center, and he always tells he had like less than a 1 ERA, but he had a 1-10 record or something like that because there's no one else on his team. But he said at Britt one year, because they had to play all away games, he said the coach would say games at 7, be there by 6:30, don't do anything stupid. And he goes, we'd roll out of our cars, throw down our cigarettes, and say, let's play. Back in the day. But he said one time in Britt, it was before you guys had a fence and everything, where it would just go like into the football practice field. He said they had this big guy, Arnie Doden, who was a state champion shot putter, discus. And he said one time this guy finally connected on a ball, hit it so far it was darn near across the street. He said you guys used like 5 cutoffs. He was so slow, used about 5 cutoffs and got him out at home by about an easy 10 feet. He said that's one thing I'll never forget.
I do remember that because we had a little bit different situation like you had described. This was before we had our chain link fence installed. The right center field, the ball could roll all the way to the street. I'm not sure what street that is anymore, 9th Street or something. Anyway, he hit that, and it was between center and right. Right fielder took off after it. He chased it down. He was clear down almost to the end of the practice field. Our center fielder went over, and we actually worked on hitting cutoffs a lot in practice. And I'm sure the outfielders got tired of me yelling, hit the cutoff. Well, this night, the right fielder chased it down. He threw to the center fielder who had moved over in the cutoff position. Our second baseman went out, and from the center fielder to the second baseman, we used our pitcher as a cutoff in the center because he's usually the most accurate and throwing. If he's a pitcher, he should be. And so then the second baseman threw to the pitcher, and the pitcher turned and threw to the catcher, and it was not close, but he had hit it 450 feet if he hit it a foot. And we were able to actually made me feel really good that everyone threw to the cutoff man, and we got him out.
Yeah, my dad said we were on the ground, like we couldn't even tears in our eyes, laughing so hard because it looked like he was just pulling a plow, and it was like, whoever would imagine you have 4 or 5 cutoffs in a game. So,
and I do want to mention, your dad was undeserving of that record because we might have beat him, 3-1 or 3-0 or 2-1, because I think the first time that we faced him, the first batter that went up there probably did not see the first pitch. He threw it so hard that I think it was in the catcher's mitt before he even knew. And then the other thing is nobody dug in real hard in the batter's box because your dad was just pleasantly wild enough that you didn't want to get too set in there because he could throw hard. He really could throw hard. And he didn't have a lot of support.
He said there'd be games where it would be walk, steal, pass ball, 1-0, game over, and he'd strike out 18 guys or something like that, just ridiculous. So
he had a lot of strikeouts against us. I know that, but we'd manufacture a run. we might have to bunt, but if we hit the ball and just put the bat on the ball, there was going to be some errors. And so we would bank on that if it was a hit ball, of course, all the guys would come back in. That was a hit, wasn't it? No, it was right to the shortstop.
Yeah.
Whoever.
Not pens. Yeah. So let's stay on the topic of baseball. And you 69 to 89 were your years coaching, so 20, 21 years. Who are some of the players that stand out over the years? Some of your best players? What were some of your best seasons, playoffs, and stuff like that?
Well, you're going back in the memory book here of almost 50 years, and I'm going to forget some of them. And I certainly don't mean to, and I hope I don't offend anybody that I fail to mention. I have a fond memory of the very first year I coached, because I don't, the field wasn't great. I don't think, if memory serves me correct, that they had won hardly any games. And that first year, I don't know if we had any seniors on the team. They graduated, you got a new coach coming in, and a lot of them were, working and stuff, because we practice after supper, 6 o'clock or whatever. And Steve Betcher, Chuck Keyser, Gary Passmore, Bill Barker, Gary Fox, Randy Mozak. These are Ron Eisman. These are kids that are sophomores, juniors, and they made up the bulk of the team. And we ended up, I think, 8-8. So they helped, I guess, me validate that with hard work, fundamentals, we tried to develop good pitching and defense. I would hit infield practice, situation baseballs, have kids run bases and give them a situation. You got one out, runner at first, and I'd hit the ball. I wouldn't tell them where I was going to hit it, and they had to react. And so that was the way in which I tried to prepare kids to know, you can't think about what you're going to do after the ball is hit. You need to play situations in your mind beforehand. And Steve Betcher and Dave Keyser were our pitchers primarily, and they did a good job. They, like I said, we didn't win a conference championship, but we kind of set, the parameters of what we were going to try and be. And I guess my philosophy with my background in pitching, and I was an infielder also, is if you have good pitching and good defense, you're going to be in most games. The 74 baseball team was probably one of the best records. I think we won like 20 or 21 games and only lost a couple. And that obviously had a lot of those same names in the 73 football championship. Bob Swears, Jim Deemer, Mark Stevenson, Rick Klein. They were just really, really good athletes that were football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, didn't matter. They were athletes and they competed. Unfortunately, we were in a couple of, in the area where a couple of teams had such strong baseball. Bancroft, St. John's, Newman and Mason City. You had Vince Meyer, who was a Hall of Fame coach, had won over 1,000 games. And he just had those kids. Of course, they played spring and fall baseball and summer baseball. And he'd won championships in all those. And so they had more, some of their kids had more games played in 1 year than our kids had played in their whole career. Because they'd have like 20 games in the spring and the fall, another 20, and then 20. And so they might have had 60 games before the 1 year was out. 1978, I think, had Jay and Rick Burgart, Bob and Mark Eisman, Sean Foy. That was a really, John Pritchard, a really fine group as well. We unfortunately ran into Bancroft St. John's up at their place, and we were ahead 6-0 going into the 7th inning. And all of a sudden, Bob Eisman was pitching, and the strike zone got seemingly smaller. And we walked a number of batters. They scored 7 runs and never hit the ball out of the infield.
Oh boy.
And after the game was over, Vince Meyer, who I had tremendous respect for, he made it a point to come over and said, we didn't deserve to win that game. He said, we're going to take it. But he said, you definitely outplayed us, because we hit the ball, we fielded the ball, we did everything right up until the 7th inning, and things, get a little tense and stuff. But that was the one. And the 1987 team with Dave Carter, Tony Boothroyd, Mike Grimmer, Kurt Hawk, and that guy that's on the video here with me, he was a pretty good first baseman. In fact, he was an all-conference first baseman. I have to tell a story about him.
Oh boy.
He almost never was a first baseman. He was an outfielder, right, Mark?
I was. I did not love it. I did not love it.
We went around and round about him playing infield, and he was left-handed, so he had very few opportunities position-wise. Although he did remind me that he did play third base a couple times, simply because we didn't have a third baseman. Who was it? Somebody got hurt or was gone.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But anyway, after his sophomore year, he had no fond memories of the outfield. He wanted to play first base. And I have to give a shout out to the mothers again, because Mark's mother, she had a little influence in giving him an opportunity to play first base. And so between, I think, the summer of his sophomore and his junior year, we would go up to the baseball diamond, and I would hit balls, and I think that I would hit them purposely hard. And anyway, he convinced me that he was a good first baseman. And I guess the fact that he was all conference his junior and senior year did prove that. And found out that his mother was smarter at baseball than I was.
Yep.
So,
Mark, what do you want to playing baseball for your dad? Do you have anything you want to pipe in there?
Oh, it was great. Just like, my dad described, like I had a coach, and it was anytime I wanted it. And like, if I said, let's go up and hit balls, Dad never said no. So I was there all the time. I also had the opportunity, I think Dad would just give me the keys, and we had the old pitching machine that had the arm.
Yep.
And so I just go take buckets of balls, and I would hit for 2-3 hours at a time. And that's back in the days when apparently supervision wasn't all that important, because I just opened it up and did it myself. So,
Yep.
but it was great. I loved it. I think I excelled because my dad was the coach. I got a lot of help.
Yep. Coach, what was
like I said,
farthest? Oh, go ahead.
well, as like I said, I can't take credit for all of that, because his mother had a little bit of convincing to tell the old coach to give the guy a chance.
Well, that puts you in an awkward position. I remember the story of Steve Everett. The coach stepped aside because his son was coming up, and he wanted to give him an opportunity to play. I mean, that's a difficult position to put your son in over somebody else that is on the team. So I heard that story, and I was like, wow, that's a pretty big commitment to let your son excel. So
Yeah, because he went out.
Well, it kind of brought me.
Yeah.
It brought me back to I think it's that novel Tale of Two Cities, opening lines. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And it turned out to be the best of times for me getting to coach Mark. And I'm sure at first it was the worst of times for him because his dad was the coach.
Yep.
But
Yep, tough both ways.
no, it was great. And that I admire Coach Sanger for the way in which he had 4 sons. And I think as a coach, when you're coaching your own son, you're hard on him. And not because that's just the way you want to be, but if they're going to have to earn everything they get, and you don't want to slight another kid. But I know that I was probably harder on Mark, and I think Coach Sanger was definitely hard on his boys, and they were, I don't want to say they were better for it, but they definitely earned their stripes, and they weren't given anything.
Yep, that's tough. You don't want to be accused of nepotism or anything,
Yep.
but you want to push them to be better. That makes sense.
Yep.
So, so in '89, that was your last season. Why'd you give up baseball at that point? What kind of happened there?
Well, that was when we reorganized with Kanawha,
Yeah.
and we had restructured things, and I didn't feel like if I was the athletic director, again, kind of like coaching your own son, I didn't want to be viewed as the athletic director. Maybe none of the other sports would have had any money for their budget if it were left up to the baseball coach to budget out what they could purchase and stuff. And I just thought, I'm going to have my plate full being the athletic director. And during the summer, it's a time where you have to kind of have a little bit of time for yourself.
Yeah.
And it was a case for just realizing, I think, that the athletic director job was a big job, and it was going to require a lot of time, effort, and energy on my part. And so that was primary decision. And our 2 children, Mark and Tara, had graduated, and it was kind of like a perfect time then.
Yeah. Who did you take over for as athletic director? Or how did that work with
Bill-
the reorganization?
Yeah, Bill Hudson was the athletic director prior to me. Bob Grangenet was the athletic director prior to Bill.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so I think Bill had then become the guidance counselor in both the elementary and the high school, where before he was only the guidance counselor at the high school. So he had to take on additional duties. And I think that he felt like I did, that it was going to be more on his plate just doing the guidance work. And so when they restructured some of the classes that I was teaching in 8th grade, were going to be going down to Kanawha. So that's why I say that there was a restructuring of a number of faculty because some of them were moving to different grade levels or traveling to Kanawha as well.
Yep. Yep. So you were the AD from 1989 to 2005, which I graduated in 2005. So you were my AD the 4 years I was in high school. What I remember from you, and it's more like with an athletic director, sometimes if you're not seen and heard, that means you're doing a good job. You're the behind the scenes, everything's going well. It's the stuff that people don't see that makes a successful event. And for me, remembering you, everything was organized, everything was always ready to go. I never heard coaches say anything about we don't have this. It seems like we had what we needed. So for me, I always appreciated that, and I bet you there was times where I didn't even, and none of us knew what you all did because you just did it and it was done. And the coaches were always so appreciative, is what I remember from an AD. So do you want to just walk us through the life as an AD at a small school?
Well, it's hopefully I was detailed and organized, because those are two qualities. I think that if you're going to have a successful year, you definitely have to do that. I did not realize as a coach all the things that the athletic director had to take on to make sure that your programs were running smoothly. Typically, you're scheduling 2 and 3 years in advance. So you're working out there with your calendar, scheduling games, hiring officials, doing all that stuff 2 and 3 years in advance. And you have to make sure that that officials get contracts. So you're doing contracts from the coaches, and I always had a lot of cooperation with our coaches. I can't say enough good things about them. Getting us rosters, getting physicals lined up, and making sure that everybody was legal in terms of having their physicals done. And like I said, you're constantly communicating with visiting teams, with the officials. You have to get a transportation schedule ready so that buses are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, and they actually go to the town that you're supposed to be going to. I will say that one of the things that I'm proud of is that we never had an event where the officials did not show up. We actually were involved in several when we would go to a visiting site and there were no officials. And I remember at Belmont Clemmy, they had to get 2, 3 officials from the Belmont crowd, coaches like junior high coaches and stuff, that had their coaching certification or umpiring certification, and Danny Brum officiated as well. So the 4 of those came out of the stands. We were half an hour late, and they officiated a great game.
Yep.
There was no arguments about any call or anything, but the mere fact that in the 16 years that I was the athletic director, we never had a situation where officials did not show up. But
I can add to that. That's not common. I've been in 4 different school districts as a teacher coach. That is not common. There's mistakes. It's easy to make mistakes, and to never have officials not show up, that's pretty impressive from my perspective anyway.
Yep.
Well, like I said, being detailed and organized. We had a schedule book. I had the events listed in there. I had the officials' names. We would send out reminder cards. You had to send them contracts, get the contracts back. You have to send them reminder cards a couple of weeks prior to that. You had to get the transportation director, his schedule. There's a lot of scheduling and things behind the scene that never ever show up. And that's like with the basketball or wrestling. You have to have officials, but you also have to have people working the clock, doing those types of things. And I couldn't be happier with the cooperation that I always had in whatever event it was. Someone running the clock or doing things that were necessary, taking tickets, you name it. People were always there to help.
Yep.
So,
Dan, I had mentioned to you that I had the unique experience of I taught in Lake Mills for 12 years, and so I was a coach too, and so I coached against West Hancock and Britt, and but I coached with coaches there. And one thing they did say about my dad, and it always made me proud, but they really appreciated that he or someone always greeted the team as they arrived.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, to have that set up, that someone was greeting the team, welcoming them, showing them their dressing room or whatever it was. And they commented that to me many times over the years I was there.
Yep. Where do we go? You walk in and you're lost. You have someone there to guide you. That's cool. And one thing,
Well,
Coach Timmerman, oh, sorry, go ahead.
that was one of the things that I thought, was important, the way that people perceived your school. And
Yeah.
that is, if when you're the visiting team and you come, and like you say, you wander around for 15 minutes trying to find out where you're supposed to be. So I always tried to make it a point. I would go up, if the contest, like in football, were 7 o'clock, I was up at school at 5 o'clock, because the visiting team's probably going to be there at 5:30 at the latest. And I would show them where their dressing room was, ask them what they needed, because invariably sometimes they forget tape or they forget something. So we try and accommodate them with whatever it was that they needed. But those were just personal things that I felt, made the difference. And I do know one thing: officials always was very happy working at our games, simply because they always commented about the conduct of our players and our coaches, and they never had a problem with that. And again, I would be there to greet the officials as well as the visiting team, show them to where they were going to dress, and make sure that they had towels, gave them refreshments at halftime, things like that. So just little things.
Yep. Yep. And, I think that plays a part in the fact that we're doing a podcast about Britt West Hancock right now, and all the coaches, athletic directors, teachers that we had for so many years. You mentioned a lot of those teachers helped you put the baseball field together. They didn't have to do that, but it's just that type of people that Britt's always had that makes me so proud to be from there. So, and one thing I was going to mention, at school today, talking to the track coach, Tim McKinney, down at I-35, who I teach with, he said, we were talking about our athletic director, because I said I'm doing this podcast tonight with you. And he said, it's amazing how many things I learned after the guy retired that he never let get to me as a coach. Parent issues and just things that he took care of instead of me having to take care of it when I was busy coaching. It's stuff I've heard stuff about, like yeah, you didn't let things get to the coaches sometimes because you took care of it so they could do their jobs. And it's stuff like that I know coaches appreciate as an athletic director.
Well, for the coaches, they deserve a whole lot of respect, because they have so much that they have to deal with, that, they're dealing with trying to get their squads to be the best they can be. And if they're having other things that taking up their time, effort, and energy, it's just not going to work as well. So, I could listen, and parents could vent or whatever. And sometimes they just needed to say it. And so I was an ear to listen to. And then after they kind of saw a different perspective or whatever, what they thought might be a big problem maybe wasn't that big of a problem after all.
Exactly. Yep. And me personally, I think ADs should get more credit when teams do well, because you're the people doing the behind the scenes stuff and making sure coaches can coach. I just made a list here of some stuff that happened during your tenure from '89 to 2005. Football, obviously, we know the football team's always been good. 12 trips to the playoffs in those 15 years. State title in '96, runner-up in '93. The wrestling team was state runner-up in '92. I include in here the boys basketball team won a conference title in '97, which in Britt, that didn't happen very often, so that was a big deal. The girls track team won a state title with Beth Evans as their coach. Steph Airy won an individual track title. I know there's been others in there. Nate Smith won 4 straight in the 100. I just listed a couple there. I'm sure there's obviously more, but what are some of those type of events that stick out to you as the athletic director?
Well, the fact that we had such a varied representation, I think speaks highly of our coaches and the athletes. I think every coach will tell you that the credit goes to those kids.
Mhm.
They're the ones that are, yes, the coaches give them direction, they give them fundamentals and, give them the confidence or whatever. But I don't feel like that, I had really anything to do other than providing the opportunity for coaches to coach. I tried to get them the schedules that they liked, getting them games, and getting them the equipment, getting them the things that would enable them to be successful. And I thought that if I could do that, then we had good coaches, we had good athletes, and we were going to have good teams. And I think that was pretty simple philosophy, is give them what they need and get out of their way, let them coach.
Yep. And I'll argue with your humbleness a little bit, because a not good athletic director is going to drive good coaches away. And so I think an athletic director who does their job and does it well that's gonna create that longevity amongst coaches. And there's been a Sanger coach in football at Britt for 53 years now. Track, I can list, there's just been a handful in the last how many years. There's just been that, I think that's a big part of it too, is just, doing your part to make sure that they can do their job and things go well. And
Well, thank you for that compliment, Dan. But, one thing that I will touch on, and this goes way back early in Coach Sanger and my coaching career. And I moved down to the junior high, and Coach Sanger and I had a real good discussion. And I think that he had to change some of his philosophy, some of the things that maybe we weren't doing as well as coaches early on. You have to have time to develop. But I think that one of the things that Coach Sanger really took to heart, and when he made a few changes in the way he approached things, and I don't know if he read it, heard it, but he said several different times when we talked, he said, kids don't care how much you know, like X and O's and stuff, until they know how much you care. And that epitomized Coach Sanger. He truly cared for his athletes. I tell you, if you went to, which you've been there, Dan, to the football end of the season, every kid in that senior class was important. And they felt important. And he made them important because whether they were a starter or on the kickoff or the kick receiving, special team or whatever, everybody had a job. And it was important that they carry out and be the best they could be at that particular position. And I think that is one thing. The other thing that I think has been really, really significant is when we went with that conversation, he said, I want you to go down to junior high. And he said, I want you to implement our system. And I think you will know, having gone through it, that 7th graders, 8th graders, they ran the wing tee, they ran 242 trap, 245 dive, 236, 327. This is a post lead block. This is a trap block. Kids in 7th grade, I mean, they couldn't even figure it out half the time. But 8th grade, they got a lot better. 9th grade, they got a lot better. 10th grade, they know all the terminology. When you talk about a post lead block or a trap block or a 242 or a 343, everybody knows it, and they just get better and better. I don't know how many thousands times have you heard the 245 dive or the 327, so it just enabled them. I think they still run the wing tee down in the junior high program. I hope they do.
They do. I saw some videos that someone posted on YouTube a while back. So one thing I was going to ask you, do you remember I caused some more work for you one time during basketball season? a game at home against Ventura, been my junior year, so probably 2003, 2004. I got ejected from the game for some violence at the end of the game. Did that cause you to have to make a phone call or an email or two?
Well, we had to write a situation letter explaining all of the things that went on, and I did get to correspond with the one of the directors at the state association
Yep.
on several different phone calls, but it all worked out and all squared away, and I had forgotten about that one.
I got a technical, a flagrant, an ejection, and a suspension all in about 4 seconds or something like that. So, yeah, they weren't calling a foul, so I said, I'm going to make them call a foul, and they did. So, yeah, that was a good time.
Well, yeah, well, yeah, I can't disagree with you.
Yeah.
There was a little bit more paperwork to take care of.
Yep. The Lake Mills basketball coach gave us a compliment once, Kyle Menke. He said I knew a kid named Joel Wolfel who played there, and he was a good player. And I said, "What does your coach tell you when you play West Hancock in basketball?" And he goes, "It's pretty much just a bunch of football players pretending to play basketball for a couple months out of the year. So be prepared to get hit." And like, yeah, that's pretty much how I played. I was going to use my 5 fouls as best I could. So
It's funny.
Well-
that was the same accusation that I had when I played basketball in '88.
we're going to be physical, make you work for it.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I know that you were a strong rebounder, Dan.
Yeah,
That was
that was my
forte.
forte. When you're a 6-foot center, you have to be. So yeah,
Yeah.
do your job and box out.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask you too before we move on to Mark here. 1995, when I was doing the record book in '94, we missed a football game that we didn't have a non-district team, and then you found Mankato Loyola to play in 1995. How did that all come to be? What was the situation there in 94, 95? Something with Starmont and North Fayette or something?
Well, actually, we had quite a reputation of being pretty good and really physical. And you had your 7 conference games, but you had 2 non-district games
Yep.
leading off the season. Well, we had a very difficult time convincing any schools to play us. I know that I would make 20, 30 calls every year or every 2 years when the schedules came out. We just couldn't find anybody to play. They would not play us. 3A, we were 2A then. We'd try and play 3A teams. We wouldn't. We'd have to drive 100 miles to North Fayette or West Union. We'd drive 125 miles to Starmont just to get a game. And Coach Sanger desperately did not want an open date. And he would say, I don't care who we play, where we play, just get a game.
Yeah.
So somehow, and I don't recall the particulars, but I don't know if Loyola of Mankato was having the same problems because they'd qualified for their state playoffs as well. And I don't know if they were having difficulty finding a game. But anyway, I got wind of the fact that they had open date, same open date we did. So I called up and he said, sure, we'll play you. He said, in fact, we'll come down. I said, fine. I'd just soon not have to travel up there. So they came down and we put a goose egg on them pretty good, knot in their head. And after the game, their coach was standing out by the doors of the locker rooms, and Coach Sanger and I and a couple of their coaches were talking, and he said, I knew we were in trouble when we drove through town at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and about 50 elementary school kids had West Hancock jerseys on. He said, I knew that the tradition was going to be pretty hard to beat. And it didn't take long before we were running up and down the field pretty fast.
Yeah, that's one of my all-time favorite stories. I said it in one of the other episodes where Don Anderson talked to that coach, and he's like, "What can you tell me?" He goes, strap them on tight. They're going to hit you. And yeah, only played them in the 1 year. Apparently that was enough for him.
Yeah, they somehow their schedule got filled up for the next year. We were supposed to go up there, and he ended up calling, and we had to cancel because of some change in their state association schedule. So
Okay.
we didn't get the opportunity to travel up there.
Yeah. They probably made that rule. They made it up or something to make it sound like they didn't want to play.
I don't think they were looking forward to it, but
No.
I don't know exactly.
Yep.
Correct.
And when I was doing the record book, I thought that was the first ever out of state game our football program had ever played. What I found out was we played Elmore, Minnesota back in the 1920s. I think it was a couple times. So,
Okay.
it wasn't the first, but it's been
good.
the last. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't think-
Couple more things for you, Coach, and then I'm going to move on to Mark. And then, like I said earlier, jump in with anything Mark has to say too. But one thing I read about when I was doing my research, a guy named Ed, I'm going to butcher his name, hopefully not, Eddie Vermazen. He seemed like that was a person that was from your past that
Actually, it was
talk about a little bit.
Ernie Vermazen was, he was an insurance salesman in Fayette, and probably every Fayette kid that played Little League baseball knew Ernie Vermazen. We had a city league, but there was a traveling team, what were called midgets and peewees. And he was a very good baseball player. He had made it into the St. Louis Cardinal AAA teams. But he was an insurance salesman, and he had a love for baseball. And he was responsible for me developing into a pitcher. He taught me how to pitch. He taught me how to throw a curveball. He taught me how to move the ball around, low and outside, low and inside, high and inside, high and outside. He said, and he taught me how to pitch, how to set up a hitter, how to never throw a ball down the middle of the plate, and being able to pitch in college, in high school, you have about 3 really good hitters, maybe 4, and then you breeze through the last part of the order usually. Well, in college, you got 8 guys that are probably all 9, because the pitcher usually was one of the better athletes in their high school team. So you had to be able to throw well, and I didn't throw that hard. I had a sneaky fast, but when you throw slow curveballs or fast breaking curveballs, your fastball looks so much faster.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't really, but I will say that for the most part, I tried not to give him a good pitch to hit, because it was always going to be, Ernie talked about pitching on the black, because if you know a home plate, the home plate is white and the very outside edge is black.
Yep.
And that's where you pitched. And or you threw a curveball that started over the center of the plate, but by the time that it got to the batter, it was 6 inches outside. And so they were swinging a lot of pitches that weren't strikes to begin with. So Ernie probably did more. Our high school team won 2 conference championships when in my junior, senior year, and probably the majority of the players on that squad, on those squads, went through his peewees and little leagues, and he went out and bought uniforms and would drive us, and moms would drive us, and we'd caravan over to different places and play. I will have one interesting thing about one of our championship teams. I said I had 2 brothers. They were a year ahead of me. And our team of 9 players, of the 9, 7 of them were brothers. my two brothers, myself, that made 3 Timmermans. We had 2 Butters and 2 Hubbles out
Nice.
of the 9 positions.
Mhm.
And all of them had gone through his programs. And so I think that he had a lot of responsibility for being as good as we were.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to let you talk about him a little bit because I read
Yeah.
that he meant a lot to you.
He
Hey,
did.
Dan, I have one little piece of trivia for the Timmerman brothers. My dad has 3 brothers, Dick, Don, Ron, and my dad. I don't know another foursome that each have shot a hole in one in golf,
Nice.
but all 4 of them have.
Ooh, nice.
Oh, that's right.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, I have one. My brother has one. My dad has one. So we're still one short there. That's cool.
Get your sister to go out and golf.
Mm. If Mr. G was still around, he would tell you that that would not be possible. She golfed with him. He let her golf at Groose once in a 9-hole meet. She shot like a 132 in 9 holes. It was her senior year, so we let her play. And she went up to him and said, "You don't have to play me anymore." And he goes, "I was not planning on it." Yeah. But that's a perfect segue because I was gonna just shout you out and Mr. Grangenet, Bob Grangenet. I hated science with a passion. It was my least favorite subject, that and math. But you and him you forced me to learn science. There are still a few things that pop in my head every once in a while when I'm teaching 4th graders that I'm like, I remember that from high school. You guys made me learn, and I'm grateful for that because you could have just been like, he's not going to get it, whatever, and you moved on. But so I wanted to thank you for that. One thing I need to apologize to you for, though, you were very particular with your note taking on the board and your color coordinating. I would be one of the kids that would take your markers in the cup and switch the lids out so that when you thought you were writing with a marker, it was actually orange or red or whatever it was, and you wouldn't be real thrilled with us. I think you'd stay closer to your desk in between periods because you didn't want that to happen. And that was
You didn't have any hand in that, did you now, Dan?
no. I'm just the scapegoat for a couple friends that wanted me to take the blame for that. So
Yeah, I want to mention one thing. Talking about younger first-year teachers and so forth. I I think that the very first year, first day, I don't know what kind of impression I made on my students. We didn't get our roster list until that morning of. And so the first class, I had not been adequately prepared for the roster names on there. Not having been from and I'm not trying to offend anybody, bohemian background. I think I had the kids rolling in the aisles. They were falling out of their chairs when I'm trying to pronounce Patsa, Birchka, Rubish, Patachik, Kapachik. The kids, when I would call their name, it was like, who's he talking about? Because I know that I butchered those names so badly that they were laughing and they thought, boy, this guy's really going to be some teacher.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, and those are names that I don't think twice about how to pronounce them. I just have known that my whole life. Yeah, people coming from other places would be like, "What in the world are these?" Yeah. So yeah, thanks for all you've done for Britt and West Hancock. You're a legend.
Well, I would never change. I taught 38 full-time years, another 5 part-time. I have so much good memories of Britt and the faculty and the students. It was just a great place to raise our family, and it was a great place to teach. I just wouldn't trade anything.
Yep. So speaking of raising families and stuff, we're gonna segue into some of Mark's stuff. He sent me some stuff that Jan babysat him, Kevin, Rick, and Jeff Sanger.
Found out
Go
Jeff
out
was
to
not
the-
part of it. It was just Kevin and Rick and my
Kevin and Rick.
sister and I. So yeah.
Yeah. So tell us some stories growing up, Sangers with your parents, the school. all that good stuff you were telling me about earlier in our prep.
My parents talk all the time about, like, when they were first year teachers, they would go up to the gym and Bob would get the trampoline out and they jump on the trampoline after hours on weekend nights and stuff. I remember hearing stories like that. For me, I know I grew up with Kevin and Rick, and we spent weekends at each other's houses and things like that. I went on a vacation with the Sangers when I was about 10. They went to the Football Hall of Fame out in Canton, Ohio, and I think I was
Shocking.
invited along. What's that?
That's shocking to hear that they go
Yeah,
to the
I know.
Football Hall of Fame.
I think it was one of the first vacations they had taken, but I think I was invited along to keep the peace between Rick and Kevin. I called Kevin today and we talked about this, but we remember driving out there. It was like a white Chevy van, and there was a bed in back, and all the boys just flopped around on the bed in the back. It was like middle of July. It was probably 100 degrees. And I have two specific memories. I remember very little about the Hall of Fame, but I remember we were driving out there, and Bob, Coach Sanger, I keep calling him Bob because I just grew up with him, and that's what I always would refer to him as. But Coach Sanger was driving the van, and Linda was riding along, and Coach Sanger just said, "I'm done. I'm tired. I want to switch." And so, I thought, I grew up with Jim Timmerman. We'll pull over and they'll switch. No, Bob just stood up in the middle of the console, and Linda slid under him, and we're driving about 70 miles an hour down the road. And I thought, we're going to die. I remember that specifically because my dad would never have done that. And the other thing is we got to so after driving all day out there in the hot van, and we finally got there, and Rick and Kevin and I were so excited. We're going to go, there was a swimming pool. We're going to go swimming. And Coach Sanger walked into the hotel room and he stubbed his toe. He was so mad that we did not get to go swimming. So that was that little trip.
So what did you do then? Just sit in the hotel room and let him be mad?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
Nice.
And I know Kevin talked about, Coach Sanger having a temper, and he did, and he wasn't mad at us. He just was mad. His toe hurt. So, and Kevin said that's probably where he got the gout. I don't know. But also then another memory I have is I spent a lot of weekends out there, and they had a 4-wheeler, and they had motorcycles and stuff like that. And we'd drive around the farm and just have fun. And one of the times, Kevin was leading, he was on the motorcycle, and I was driving the 3-wheeler, and Rick was on back with me, and we'd weave around and go wherever. And Kevin went down the ditch in between some trees, and Rick said something to me, and I turned and said, "What?" And sure enough, when I turned my head, I also turned the steering wheel, and I ran right into the tree. And I launched Rick. I mean, he flew like 20 feet in the air, I swear. I messed up my ankle because the foot peg jammed in between the tree, and so I flew off that, and Bob came rushing down, and I think he had to carry me to the hospital because whatever. They drove me in, and my parents met us there, and so that was a memory I had of that too.
How old were you when that happened, do you think?
I was probably, I say at that time, that's probably 10 or 12, probably. Okay. I don't remember exactly. Maybe a little older, I'm not sure, but we just had lots of, and growing up, as a coach's kid, Kevin and I, like we were always at the after football game gatherings. We got to hear the coaches talk about football, and we were always around the school. We were always at practices and in the hallways, and we would ride the shuttle bus from the elementary to the high school and go find our parents and get ready to go home. But we were at the school all the time. So those are pretty fond memories of just growing up in Britain. And being
Mark, you want to tell Dan about the wood pile out behind the Sanger farm?
Yeah, Kevin, Rick, and I, and it might have been Jeff too, I don't know, we were out there, and we thought it'd be great to have a bonfire. We didn't tell anybody, of course, so we started a little bonfire, and we threw wood on it, and it was good. And then about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, Mrs. Sanger called, "Yep, time to come in." So we just kicked around the coals a little bit, went inside, and I think like at 3 o'clock, like 5 to 8 trees were just blazing on fire in their grove. And so nice. I think Coach Sanger had to go out and spend like a good portion of the evening trying to put out the fire.
Oh man, that's good.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Nice. So he definitely didn't name Mark Sanger after you, or was that where Mark's name came from? Or he's like, I'm not, that's just a coincidence. That kid burned down my property.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah. So let's transition into playing for Coach Sanger. Then you played from 84 to 87 for coach. So was it, I mean, what was it like playing for him after you pretty much grew up at their house and
Mm-hmm.
best friends with their sons? What was that like?
One of the things Kevin and I, we would often just play, I'd run routes and he'd throw the ball. Like I always wanted to be Lynn Swan of the Steelers. And
Yep.
I'm not sure which quarterback Kevin was, but that we did that a lot. We just would play football in the yard. And so knowing that we were going to be on the same team, and one thing I wanted to point out, like I was the class of 88 and we played football in 87, but my dad was our junior high football coach. And then when we were 10th graders, we didn't lose a game. We didn't lose a game in junior high in 8th grade. We didn't lose a game when we were in 10th grade. And the first game we ever lost was in state championship.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was a pretty cool experience. But I know one time I had to, when the class above me, Tony Boothroyd and Don Finch, Ron Finch, all those guys, when they were sophomores and I was a freshman, Tony Boothroyd had played too many quarters in varsity, so he couldn't play a game, and I had to be the quarterback for the JV game, and I was scared to death. And I think Coach Sanger knew I was scared to death. Like I did not want to play that game, but I had to do it because we needed someone to play it. And he found me during the day, and my dad talked about how much he cared, and he knew that I was worried about it. I had practiced all week and I was prepared, but he was really a calming influence. He said, "You're going to be fine. Just run the plays. The plays, and the other guys will help you out." And it all went fine, and we won the game. So I just remember that moment where he came and he sought me out, pulled me out of study hall, and said, "Everything's gonna be okay." So
yeah, well, we only have 6 plays in the playbook. How'd you not know them all? I mean, should have.
I did have to throw 2 passes. I was a 1 for 2. I never saw either one. I just would launch it up in the air, and luckily, I think JJ Daniels caught one of them. So
that sounds like West Hancock football right there.
Right.
Twice a game, just toss it up and see what happens.
wow. You bet.
Yep. So talking about if you were, you said you didn't lose a game JV and stuff. I was, of course, looking at varsity. In your 4 years, the varsity team was 38-6. You guys started kind of a string that as I go through the record book, from when you started until darn near a couple years after I was out of school, every single 4-year senior never lost an average of more than 2 games a year. I mean, it was like 1.5 losses per season on average in a 4-year span for almost 25 years or something like that. And your group was kind of the group that started a lot of the tradition. I know we had the 73 championship team, but 84 is when we started going to the playoffs pretty much every single year. You were a part of a quarterfinal team, another quarterfinal team, and then 2 runner-ups. 86 and 87, you guys won 3 conference championships. Can you describe those 2 championship games, those seasons? I know we were talking before I hit record about you pretty much won every game by about 6 points your senior year. What can you have some stories and some experiences from those seasons?
Well, the kind of neat thing is that when the 84 team made it to the playoffs, I think Coach Sanger addressed like almost everybody because he wanted everyone to experience the playoffs and kind of know what that's all about.
Yeah.
And I remember I didn't, obviously play it down any of my first freshman, sophomore, junior, but we sat on the sideline or stood on the sidelines and typically froze, but it was cool to be in a playoff atmosphere. And once you're around that, you want to be around that and want to keep it going. So the first 2 freshman, sophomore years, and then, things were going pretty well, but, our junior years when we made it to the finals, and I didn't play much at all that year, but again, that was a pretty loaded group and they were really, really good. And I know like Pat Kelly and Nick Smith, they did play. Jeremy Hill played a lot on that team. And so when it came our turn in the class of 88 in the 87 football season, I recall just like we did not want to be the team that had a let up or let down anybody. And I know that somehow, somewhere, someone put up they drew a picture of the Unidome and they put it in the multi-purpose room before the season started, because that was really the only thing that was on our mind, is getting back to the Unidome and playing in a championship, because we wanted to win. We had lost to Linville Sully on almost a last play event when that team lost in 86. So we wanted to get back there. And I being on a great team like that and with that a singular mission was just an awesome experience in my life, and it changed my life really forever. Because later on, when I was a coach, I tried to recreate that with my athletes that I coached. And I'm a principal of a school now, and I actually talk about teaming all the time. I talk about what it's like to be on a fantastic team, and how it requires trust and hard work, and you have to have each other's back, and you have to hold each other accountable, and things like that. So all those things were present in the teams that played, and when I was in high school. So
Yep.
yeah, that was great.
Yep. I can echo your sentiment too. Like my freshman year to sophomore year, my only goal was to be one of the sophomores who dressed varsity
Hmm.
so I could be on a playoff team. He didn't dress everybody at the time, like you said, back then, but by then it was, 16 playoff trips later. So it was kind of the expectation. That was a big deal to us. So
Yeah.
if I ask Sue Crosby, one of your employees, if she hears stories about Brit football in your PD meetings, she'll be like, "Yep, there's talking that team again." So I know
Yep.
Sue pretty well.
She would. Yeah. One of my teachers, any of my teachers would say that, because we've
Yep.
really had focused on being great teams. And I tell stories about just what it meant as high schoolers to hold each other accountable and to support one another and things like that. And it, when there's nothing better than being on a great team, no matter what, whether it's your profession or when you're in high school or whatever, it's just a great feeling. You have people
Yep.
that trust you and you trust them. And it's just, and that's what we had. And I know that's the experience I took away from it.
And if I can just kind of add to that, that was probably one of the things that meant so much to me, and why that group of teachers in Britt and then later West Hancock stayed there, is that we had such a great team that, everybody was doing their own job, but they were
Mhm.
always willing to help out anybody else with things. I know when Coach Sanger went through several back operations, and he'd expired all of his sick leave, teachers would fill in. They'd either give some of their sick leave to him, or they would cover his class, do things. And that kind of went with most of the faculty. I really got to experience the best time, because we had a large contingent of teachers that really liked each other. They worked, they did their jobs, and yet they were willing to help out wherever it was needed. And you don't always find that, I don't think. I can't really tell because I only taught in the one system, and it was
Yep.
great.
Yep. Well, I can attest. Oh, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I told a Brit football story this week. I had a staff meeting and it came up.
Nice.
So yeah, it's part of my life. It's part of what brought me to be to where I'm at now. So
Yep.
I actually watched the entire '87 football season in preparation for this, because it's been a long time and I have the DVDs, but I don't get them out much. But I watched that. And I actually called Kevin Sanger today too, and we talked a little bit about some things. And I'm shocked at how well we did, because there's some things that we shot ourselves in the foot from time to time as well.
Yep. When you work hard, though, good things happen. I think that's been
Yeah.
a lot of our program is we outworked ourselves, the other teams, and played hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is what you're talking about, Mr. Timmerman. I've been in 4 different school systems in the last 10, 11 years, and it's not like it is at Britt and most other places. It's just a different atmosphere at Britt and at West Hancock than I've been around, and I even could tell that as a student. And then when I did a long-term subbing job there, I'm like, and then I got to my schools where I've been teaching, and I'm like, yeah, it's a hard place to replicate. So, Mark, you ready to? You might need to make your screen a little bigger. I'm going to go through some stats here from your seasons. Are you ready for this?
Well, you don't have to talk about me. I mean, I'd prefer to talk about our team, because our team is kind of fun to be on.
But I have the record book. You have the record books. I just thought this is kind of cool. We're not a passing program, but you've made some dents in some of the receiving sections of the book, and some of these are my obscure stats that I like to throw together. But like you said, you didn't play much. Even your junior year, you just had 1 catch for 7 yards. But then your senior year, 21 catches for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. And if you're not familiar with Britt and West Hancock, you're like, that's not great. But we were a running team, and those are really good stats for Britt and West Hancock for passing, receiving. Kevin was your quarterback and one of your best friends. Going through the record book, you have a school record in the Sanger era for most games with 3 or more receptions and with 4 or more receptions in a game. You're 6th in receptions in a season, 8th in a career for receptions. In the 87 title game, you had 83 yards receiving. That's, I think, in the top 6 or 7 on the leaderboard for yards in a game. That's actually a Sanger era record for most in a championship game. 4th for most yards in a quarterfinal game. You're 5th in season yards and 4th in career yards. And you pretty much did that all in one season because, like you said, you only played varsity most of your senior year. So I get a chance to show some stats, and
Yeah.
I have to do that. So, and I know it's a team game, but it's just kind of fun to think back and look at some of those numbers. So,
I'll-
Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead.
Well, the funny thing about Britt and West Hancock being a non-passing team, Bob always used to get asked that question about why don't we pass more and stuff. And he'd always say, well, when you throw the ball, only 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad.
yep.
Throw an incompletion, an interception, those are bad. The only way it can be good is if you have a completion. So he said, when I run the ball, I know I can get 3 yards or 4 yards or whatever. So he said, yeah, I think I'll just stick with running the ball.
Yep, definitely.
It's funny. I was talking to Kevin today, and a couple things. I don't know if this is a stat you knew about or anything, but as I was going through the video, all of our games, I said to Kevin, I was shocked at how often we fumbled. And Kevin recited that we fumbled 48 times that season. So if you ever wonder why the games were close, that had something to do with it. Like, we fumbled a lot. And I had my own fumbles as well. So I contributed to that. And the other thing too, that, I noticed, like our team, and Kevin and I talked about this, that we truly were like 3 or 4 yards and fall down and get up and do it again. Because I've seen in recent years with West Hancock football, there, there's been some burners. There's been some really fast kids and, some really elite athletes, in my opinion. I look at our team, and we were really just, we were not specially talented when it came to quickness or things like that. We were big, strong football guys. I was not one of them, but, it was truly 3 or 4 yards and a cloud of dust. And we just kept on sticking to it. But the thing about the passing game is, if you take our attempts, we were averaging 8 passes a game almost. And another thing I had forgotten, Kevin broke his hand in the Forest City game. That was the second game of the season that year. He got it sandwiched between 2 helmets, and he had to come out of the game. Well, he didn't come out of the game. At halftime, he had been hit. And we were in the locker room at halftime, and he said to his dad, he said, "Oh, my hand hurts so bad." And Coach Sanger said, "Shut up, you're fine." And so he played the second half. And then Kevin told me they were at home that night, and he said, "Geez, my hand just hurts so much." And Coach Sanger said, "Shut up, you'll be fine." And so then Mrs. Sanger said, "We're going to take him to the doctor and get looked at." And sure enough, he had broken his hand. And so for like the next game, Lake Mills, we won in overtime, 12-6. We didn't pass one time because Jim Cheezick had to be the quarterback. And so we had 5 days to figure out how to be a team with a different quarterback, because we hadn't really practiced that. And then for the next 2 or 3 games, every pass we made, Kevin would hand it off to Jim, and Jim would pass it. And we actually passed more after Kevin broke his hand than we did before.
Yep.
So that was kind of interesting.
Those were game articles that I read when I was doing the record book that were maddening to me, because it would say like Kevin Sanger snuck it in from a yard out for a touchdown, but then it would say Jim Cheezick passed it to some. I'm like, okay, Kevin's the quarterback, but he's not. I had to call Kevin and try to get it all squared away, so I had the stats and stuff right. And I'm like, that's not fair to me to figure that out, but
Right, yeah.
made it a challenge, that's for sure.
I bet it did.
So, to kind of segue into this a little bit, when you and I were talking, prepping about this, you were at Lake Mills after high school, and you mentioned a few times that you'd have to defend your hometown and your coach a little bit. Tell us about after high school, college, your first teaching job and stuff like that, and your coaching and track.
Well, I ended up going to UNI and graduated with an elementary education major. So I ended up in Lake Mills, and I was, this is kind of a cool story. When I got offered my job, they said, would you like to be a teacher? Yep. Would you like to be the head track coach? Absolutely. And then I thought, I don't know anything about coaching track. I ran a little bit in high school, but I wasn't great and didn't really do any of the specialty stuff. And I remember I called my dad and I said, do you think Coach Sanger would like meet with me and just like tell me some stuff? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I got to be a head track coach. And he did. Like, we went out to the Sanger farm and we sat and for hours, I just peppered him with questions. And Coach Sanger told me everything that was worth knowing. And I wrote it all down and I kept those notes for years because they helped me. It wasn't so much about technique. It was about like, how do you get kids to work hard? What kind of workouts do you do? And, and I was a coach competing in the same conference and he gave me all the time that I needed to ask him questions. So that was really cool. But then, in where I lived in Lake Mills, there were some people that had moved from Osage. So there was a contingent of people that had endured the 88-0 game against Britt back in the day. And then there was also the kids I was coaching. I coached Mike Stenger's kids. Yep. And Mike and Maynard Stenzer, the 73-74 kind of time, and they had lost to Britt. And that was a huge thorn in their side. Like, they talked about it all the time. Like, they should have beat Britt and they should have gone to the state and won the championship. And I heard about it all the time because they knew I was from Britt. And then while I was at Lake Mills, the 96 team that won the state championship with Jeff Sanger and Chad Klein and Nick May and Jeremy Heyer and all those guys. To be honest, they didn't love Britt. They didn't even like Britt, and they thought Coach Sanger was an evil coach because he ran the score up and things like that. Now, that particular year, they were just that good. And they played Lake Mills twice that year. And in my head, I was rooting for Britt, but I had to sit on the Lake Mills side because that's who was paying my check. Yep. But I don't know if you in the stack, but if you look at those games, I think the second game was like 72-48.
The first game was 76-28, and then the playoff game was 59-30.
Yeah, and if I've ever seen a track meet of games, and on the Lake Mills team, they were a good team. They had Mark Van Gorkum, who's like a 6'7" receiver, and Andy Stenger, who was a 6'8" tight end, and they had some pretty decent running backs. And so it was just up and back and up and back. So that was, but I did have to kind of hold my own and say, Britt's a great place, and Bob Sanger's a great coach. And I played for him, and wouldn't have traded it for a thing. And people just, whatever, and so they'd give me a hard time about that.
Oh yeah. And
I'll mention one other thing too, Dan. Coach Sanger was not just Mark. He was very open about helping any other coaches that would seek his expertise and knowledge, and I won't mention who, but there's been more than one time where, and this was a coaching staff in our conference, wanted to meet with Coach Sanger and wanted to pick his brain about all kinds of things. And he was very open and told them, and it was kind of like what Mark said, we weren't necessarily the most talented. We didn't necessarily have naturally occurring athletes, but like you even had mentioned, we outwork people. And Coach Sanger could not convince these other coaches that was the secret. There wasn't a secret. It was hard work.
Yep.
But, they wanted to know, the X's and O's. And that wasn't what Coach Sanger was about. Yeah, there's some strategy to that and calling the right plays and stuff, but it was more about getting your athletes to believe in a system and then work hard enough to execute and make that system work.
Yeah.
I can add to that too. It's my own personal recollection, but so Dan, you mentioned that, that 87 season, every game was like 7-6, 14-6. Yeah. I mean, it was one touchdown wins almost through the entire season, except for Belmont and Rockford too. So, but we got to the playoffs, and this is a moment that I will never forget. We were going to play Lake City, and we were warming up, got all the warm-ups done, and coach brought us over into the end zone, and he really got our attention. He gave a speech that I'll never forget, and he talked about the word potential. I don't know if when you were playing he talked about potential, but he said over and over and over during that speech, gentlemen, and I love the fact that he calls gentlemen. gentlemen, you have the potential. And he believed we could be state champions. And up to that point, I don't know if we believed that, because our games have been so close and so tight. We'd won by just a little bit by so many teams, against so many teams. And he kept on saying, you have the potential, but you haven't done it yet. You haven't shown us what you can be. You haven't done it yet. Now's the time to go show us. And I'm not doing it justice, but I remember having tears in my eyes, and I remember many of my teammates also. And we went out there and won 35-0. It was the first time we truly showed up for a game. I credit A, we didn't want to let him down. B, we loved the fact that he believed in us, and we wanted to prove it. And so that's one of my favorite memories of the Britt football season of '87. It wasn't about the win or the loss. It was about that he cared and that he found a way to channel that to get us to play to our best ability.
Yep. And I'll echo that. My senior year, 2004, we lost a big game to Northwood and cost us the playoffs. That was my first thought. Like I let him down. Like it was such a disappointment. Not that we weren't going to the playoffs, but he deserved better than that. That was my mindset at the time too. And in the 2015 state basketball tournament, I'm sitting there watching where I'm teaching my school play, and then Britt was playing in the last game of the afternoon. Someone tapped me on the shoulder, and it was Coach Sanger, and we sat there and talked for 4 or 5 hours that day. And that's one thing I mentioned to him. I apologized to him for losing a football game in 2004. That's how much it meant to me, and it meant to, I think, so many people throughout the years. And that brings me up to my next little bullet point on my notes is when you came over to my house last summer to pick up your record books, and then we talked out in my garage looking at my gym mat thing.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that during the state championship game, you had to be at school because I think you said you were short on subs and just couldn't get away and get up to the dome. And you were like, I locked myself in my office and pretty much told my staff, unless someone or something's on fire, don't bother me during the game. I
did.
think of too many places out there where someone who had graduated 30 years before still cares that much about the program. And a lot, I don't miss a game. I made the record book. There's thousands of people that watch the live stream. People still go to the games all the time. People pay attention to the scores. I just don't think that's common.
I don't either. I don't think it is either.
As much as we do about our alma mater. I think that's pretty neat.
Well, even all the way down here in Arkansas, that live stream on Friday nights is on there, and watching them all the way go through the playoffs. And I'll have to admit, I was yelling at some officials when they called that a fumble, or they didn't give us the first down. And when we played
Hudson.
and lost that championship game, only because we should have had a 1st and goal instead of having to have a 4th and 2.
Yeah.
And we would have been state champs 2 years in a row.
Yeah, that was the semifinals against Hudson. We
Yeah.
never should have been in a hole that we were in, but then definitely we would have scored on that drive. So yeah. But yeah, it's a big deal to a lot of people. When I was getting interviewed by KIOW, Zarin Egesil was interviewing me about the record book, and he said we have West Hancock, Lake Mills, Garner, Forest City, and North Iowa that we do live streams for. He said there's a lot of nights where those other 4 schools combined don't equal the amount of viewers that West Hancock has on a Friday night. He says usually there's 10 to 15 different states and sometimes even 3 and 4 different countries that have people watching the game. So it's pretty neat.
I've learned you got to get on early so you can make sure you're on. Otherwise it gets shut down.
Yeah. I usually get on there at about 6:02 or something like that, because I do a lot of my live stats and updates during the game. And then Jay and Kevin will ask me questions on the game, and I'll be ready to go. I'm like, yeah, I can't get caught not being on the game. So yeah, but yeah, we need to wrap this up here in the next couple minutes. I have school tomorrow. It's just professional development, so nothing important, but no offense, principal, but
no offense taken.
I don't work at your school, so I can say that. But yeah,
right.
But I wanted to thank you, Mark, too, for the artwork that you donated to use on the back of those record books. I had a lot of people when I was passing those books out that were very complimentary of your work, and thankful that you gave that to the project. So,
Well, I was at the Legacy Fund Day, that when Coach Sanger and Mrs. Sanger were there, and it meant something to me to be there with them.
yeah,
And all the football players in the stands getting the picture, and I don't know if it inspired me or not, but I felt urged or encouraged to do that. So
yeah, that's neat. I wish I could have been at that day. It was my boy's birthday party that day, and we had it planned out months in advance, but it is what it is. But
yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, just wanted to thank you guys for coming on. Before you guys jump off, though, I want to let people watching know that, again, go to sangerstrong.com and donate to the Legacy Fund. I'm on the board of directors, so it's a passion of mine. I want to see that thing continuing to grow. We have a lot of big plans coming up. We have a meeting this month about it. So go to sangerstrong.com to donate. My next guest, April 14th, I'll be talking to Rick Sanger. I had Kevin as my first guest, and then Rick will be on next. I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to reschedule Coach Perkins, but hopefully in the next month or so, I'll get Coach Perkins and Steve on there. After that, I have Coach Don DeWard from Central College, a Kanawha grad, the 1986 girls state champion golf team, John DeLeon, then Stacy and Seth Gopel, Nate Schur, and then I just added to my schedule the 1980 girls state basketball championship team seniors, and then Coach, I don't know how to say his last name, Ettringer. Is that Dennis?
Featuring
Yep, he's going to
Dennis
join us with the seniors there. So I'm pretty excited for that one as well. Have a good lineup
Yeah.
coming up. Yeah, so sangerstrong.com if you want to donate. This will be up on my YouTube channel, and then April 14th, I'll be talking to Rick Sanger. So any last words you guys want to throw in there about anything?
Well,
Anybody?
Dan, I would just like to thank you for all of your work with the record book and doing this podcast. I know that this is a labor of love that you're doing, but the time and effort that you have put in, I can't even imagine how much time. Having been an athletic director and knowing the details that you have had to go through in putting that all together, it's just mind-boggling. I can't imagine anybody undertaking something like this, and you've just done an outstanding job. And thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Dan. I mean, truly, it's something people will have forever now, and it wouldn't have been done if you hadn't do it, because I don't know who else was going to do it. So well done.
Thank you. Yep. My dad does Captain's Choice truck driving, and he goes to Britt once a month. And a lady he sells stuff to said, "Where does your son live exactly?" And because she's like, "I know he did the record book and does this podcast," and I don't remember who he was talking to. And my dad said Indianola. She goes, "No, he lives here in Britt, doesn't he?" And my dad's like, "No, he's lived in Indianola for like 10 years." And he goes, "He has to live in Britt. He does all this stuff for the school and what." I'm like, "No, I love my hometown. It's a special place, a lot of special people like you guys that came from there." So
Yeah, for sure.
good deal.
Well, it truly shows in your work, Dan.
Oh, I appreciate it. I love what I do, and I love where I'm from. So, all right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks with Rick Sanger.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.